The most important question: does our consciousness create our brain, or does our brain create our consciousness? Which comes first? Are we totally controlled by our DNA in childhood programming with no free will or ability to change our lives? Or are we able, with our minds, to free ourselves from our childhood programming and even make changes in our DNA functioning? This is the question that we're going to be discussing in this presentation. Now, some scientists believe that consciousness comes only from the brain and does not exist before or after. Carl Sagan says the brain's workings, what we sometimes call mind, are a consequence of its anatomy and physiology, and nothing more. Francis Crick, Nobelist in molecular biology, says a person's mental activities are entirely due to the behavior of their nerve cells. Dimitris Nanopoulos, professor of theoretical physics at the University of Texas, says there is no soul, there is only the brain. And Yorgos Paxinos, neuroscientist, agrees there is no soul. Everything comes from the brain. Now, there is another group of scientists who are favoring the other interpretation, that consciousness exists before the brain and during and after, and is independent from the brain, although affected by it, obviously. They have written a manifesto for the post-materialistic science. We are a group of internationally known scientists from a variety of scientific fields: biology, neuroscience, psychology, medicine, psychiatry, who participated in an international summit on post-materialist science, spirituality, and society. In Article 6 of that manifesto, which you can find at the address listed down below, science must be first and foremost a non-dogmatic, open-minded method of acquiring knowledge about nature through the observation, experimental investigation, and theoretical explanation of phenomena. Its methodology is not synonymous with materialism and should not be committed to any particular beliefs, dogmas, or ideologies. In many ways, science has become a new religion with a dogma, which, as old religions, is refusing to investigate some of the phenomena and facts of this physical dimension. Now, research was done on what people believe about God or a universal spirit or a higher power, and they found that 95% of the Americans were asked these questions believed either in God or in a universal spirit or a higher power. But in a group of about 2,000 scientists studied, only 50 to 60% of them believed in God or a higher power or consciousness. But there was an interesting factor in this study that those scientists from the age of 18 to 34 actually had a higher percentage, as 65% believing in God or a higher power. I don't know how this can be interpreted. One possible interpretation could be that they didn't feel the need to react against religion as many of the older scientists did, because they had to fight for their freedom in order to perceive reality in a different way. Another possibility is that they were brought up with a different perception of what the word God means, rather than being a angry superhuman in the heavens, rather a universal consciousness expressing itself through all beings. For me, both seem to be right from their point of view. Obviously, our mind is affected by our brain. We're affected by the chemicals and hormones which affect our brain, but temperature, electronic stimulation, all of these can create very specific emotions and very specific reactions. But the fact that our consciousness is affected by our brain doesn't mean it's created by our brain. It simply means that while our consciousness is functioning through our brain, it's affected by it. Now, an example we can understand from this example with the man in the car. Let's say that this man is consciousness, is our consciousness. It exists before getting into the car. Once, as consciousness, we are focused in the body, that is, the person is in the car, it's affected by the conditions of the car. If there's a bad smell, if there's too much heat or cold, if the electrical system doesn't work, all of those affect us while we're in the car. However, if we have a cell phone, we can have an effect outside of our car. And also, once we get out of our car, we continue to exist. So my perception is that consciousness exists even before its entry and functioning through the brain. It is definitely affected by the brain and the body and energy and chemicals and hormones. But for me, it exists also outside of the body. Now, here are some scientists who agree with this perception. Max Planck, who is the founder of the quantum mechanics, says, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as a derivative from consciousness. So he's being very clear about this, that matter comes from consciousness rather than consciousness from matter. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing, postulates consciousness. David Darling, an astrophysicist, we are conscious not because of our brain, but in spite of it. And this is something that we will come back to as we move on. Dr. Larry Dossey, Chief of Staff of the Medical City Dallas Hospital, says consciousness expresses itself through the brain, but is not created by the brain, and cannot be defined as a result of the brain. New science is a science that recognizes and gives importance to non-local manifestations of consciousness. Now, this is an interesting word, which actually comes from quantum physics. Non-local means that our consciousness can actually affect the world and be affected by the world at a distance without time taking place. So that means our intentions, our prayers, our thoughts are affecting our bodies, our minds, our brain, and the world around us. Steven Pinker, experimental psychologist at Harvard University, asked the question, how could consciousness possibly arise from the physical brain? Beats the heck out of me. I have some prejudices, but no idea how to begin to look for a defensible answer, and neither does anyone else. Pim van Lommel is a Dutch cardiologist, and he says, there are good reasons to assume that our consciousness does not always coincide with the functioning of our brain. Enhanced or non-local consciousness can sometimes be experienced separately from the body. George Wald is a Nobelist in biology. Mind, rather than emerging as a late outgrowth in the evolution of life, has existed always, the source and condition of physical reality. So he's saying that mind exists before physical reality. It's not a creation of physical reality. Erwin Laszlo, our universe is staggeringly fine-tuned to the creation of systems of higher and higher orders of complexity, differentiation, and integration. That such a universe could be created by chance is astronomically unlikely. According to quantum cosmology, that would be, the possibility is 1 to 1 with 500 zeros after that. So we're talking about an infinitesimally small possibility that this universe could be created by chance. The mathematician physicist Sir Fred Hoyle agrees with Laszlo. He says he calculated the possibilities, the probability of human beings being created by chance rather than purpose, and came to the conclusion that they are about the same as the probability of a hurricane blowing through a scrapyard, assembling a working airplane. It is the possibility that we human beings are the result of chance is very, very small. Now, what are some of those phenomena which we need to explain when in choosing whether we believe that consciousness comes from the brain or whether the brain is actually a creation of consciousness? And so I'm going to present to you some of the phenomena, facts, real facts, verified by science, that we're going to have to take into consideration in order for each of us to come to our own conclusions. Now, there is evidence here that consciousness is very likely also independent from the brain. This man, Derek Scull, his brain, according to the doctors, was not functioning. With that line that we see in the movies where there's no brain activity. But his consciousness left his body and was able to observe events not only in the room that he was, in other rooms, and what he saw was verified by the doctors that were there. Now, this is Dr. Fennick, who has made it his life goal to study these situations in which people who are temporarily dead, that is, their brain is not functioning, but come back to life, were able to see and hear in their environment and also afar. Dr. Michael Chabot has done the same experiments, the same research. And in fact, he started out to prove that what these people were reporting was not true. This was his hypothesis. And in the end, he had to change his assumptions, his conclusion, because he realized that what they saw was being verified by the doctors, nurses, in these situations. So he had to agree that consciousness is able to observe physical reality even without the functioning of the brain. Most of you have probably read one or more of Dr. Raymond Moody's books about the same subject, life after life, consciousness continuing even when the brain is not functioning. This Cypriot man, he was supposedly dead. He left his body, actually left the room, was able to observe his wife and relatives talking, and heard what they were saying, and even got angry because they were saying, oh, this poor woman, what is she going to do without her husband? And no one was sad about him having died. And he told them about that when he came back. He was actually angry at them. Now, this woman was pronounced dead. She left her body, went up onto the roof of the hospital, and saw a red shoe. Now, by some miracle, she came back. Her brain started functioning again. And they sent someone up to look just by chance. They didn't really believe her. But they found this red shoe, and when they brought it down, she said, yes, that's the shoe that I saw on the roof. Pam Reynolds, another woman who was supposedly brain dead, brain not functioning, was able to describe the most peculiar instruments used in her operation, even with cotton over her eyes. This woman, who was pronounced dead, left her body, went to her home where her husband was there, and the children were there, and she looked at the clock, and it was 10 o'clock. And she remembered that they had agreed that he would put them to bed at 8 o'clock. And when she came to, and when they met again, she told him, I came to the house, I saw you there, it was 10 o'clock, and you hadn't put the children to bed. And she was criticizing him. But her consciousness, even though her brain was dead, was able to leave and observe an environment many miles away. Now, this woman was born blind. She had never seen this world, this physical world. And when she had this problem and her brain stopped functioning, she was able to leave her body, observe the environment around her, And when she came to, she was able to describe it, although now that her consciousness was functioning through the brain, she was once again unable to see. But what she described when she was out of the brain was accurate. So here we hear Pinker's words that we are conscious not because of our brain, but in spite of our brain. So if our consciousness is functioning through a brain that has some kinds of problems, to the optical nerve or any part of the brain, we're unable to actually function as well as we could because the brain is obstructing the functioning of our consciousness. Anita Morjani was declared dead, and she left her body and was able to accurately see what her brother was doing about 300 kilometers away, losing his plane and making an attempt to get another way to see her where she was. So her consciousness was non-local. And as she describes her experience, was not non-local not only in space, but also in time. But that's another story. Now, Dr. Ian Stevenson, who is the head of research in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Virginia School of Medicine, did a huge study on about 2,400 children, and 1,200 of those who were talking about experiences before they were born, other families that they had, children that they had, wives and husbands that they had. And he took these children seriously, and they tried to find these families, and they were able to find in 1,200 of these cases the family, sometimes on other continents. And that child, between 1 and 5 years of age, was able to name the members of the previous family, supposedly a previous life, clarify the relationship that they had with them, and even tell them family secrets, which no one else knew. How can we explain this? Is there any other explanation that our consciousness pre-exists? Or is it not a creation of our brain? And definitely it's a good argument for reincarnation. Now, quantum physics has discovered the non-locality and entanglement. Non-locality means that we can be connected in a way to other beings. In this case, it's atoms and it's subatomic particles, but they have discovered this exists also for people, that when we are connected to people, what we experience also affects them. Now, here are some more examples of non-local consciousness, so that the consciousness is not limited to the brain. In twins, Sylvia and Marta Landa, 4 years old, in Spain, when one burned her hand, the same burn appeared on the hand of her twin in the same place on her hand. So that consciousness, that emotion became a burn on the twin's hand. Now, Joe McMoneagle is a remote viewer actually used by the American Army, and the Russians have their own. People who are able to see places thousands of kilometers from where they are, or miles from where they are, and describe them. And the Army takes these people seriously because they consider that they can help them find out what the others are doing. So if consciousness was limited to the brain and local rather than non-local, how could his consciousness see these things from afar? These are all facts, documented, repeated, that need to be taken into consideration when we're going to form our own perception of reality. You know my perception, I've told you. I don't ask you to believe what I'm believing, but I'm asking you to take all the facts into consideration. These are all facts. In another study in Italy, when one group of neurons was affected, the other group of neurons, which were somehow connected to that, many miles away were affected in the same way as if light was being shone on them. Now, James Fowler and Nicholas Christakis made an experiment in which they placed persons, usually happy persons, in an environment, and they found that that happiness of that person, and I'm sure the same would be true of sadness or anger or hate, was affecting not only the people that they came in contact with, but other people who came into contact with the people they came in contact with, and then three levels away, that people who came into contact with the people who came into contact with the people who came into contact with these people, that they said our emotions are like viruses which tend to infiltrate our surroundings. Now, Dean Radin, PhD and chief scientist at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, did an experiment in which they had a computer which would randomly present images on the screen. Neither the experimenters nor the persons who were part of the experiment knew which images would appear at any time. It was random, decided by the machine. And whenever a negative, a traumatic kind of image came onto the screen, the person would react before they saw it. It's as if the mind knew. So here we have non-locality in time, not only in space, that the people's nervous system reacted as if they were already seeing what they would see a few moments from then. Now, can we affect the world around us? I believe we can, but you're going to have to make your own decisions with our thoughts, beliefs, intention, prayer, mental projection, visualization, emotions, and actions. Now here we have a study on machines, random generators at Princeton University. It's called the PAIR Laboratory, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research. And they have a machine there which produces, let's imagine heads and tails, or just 1 and 0. And in any time period over 1 minute, there would be the same number of ones and zeros, or heads and tails. And this would not change. Now what they did, they put someone in front of the machine and asked that person, I want you to try to make this machine, with your mind, have more pluses or more minuses. And that person was able to do that. Many people were able actually to cause the machine to not be totally random, but to move away from the perfect randomness. And here are some of the examples. The red meaning that they were able to cause the machine to go higher, blue to go lower. And as you can see, they were able to do that, except in the case where there seems to be the same sex, two persons together, which seem to have the opposite effect. I don't know why. But two persons of the opposite sex working together had an even more powerful effect on the machine. And the greatest effect was by bonded persons of the opposite sex, that they were able actually to create an increased effect on the machine. Now, probably most of you have seen the results of Dr. Masaru Emoto's studies on water crystals. On the left, we see this water from a dam in Japan before blessing, and then the same water after blessing. So we can see that our mind, we saw previously it affects the machine, and here we can see that our mind affects water. And our blessing and our positive thoughts or negative thoughts affect the condition of water. And when you consider that water is about 80% of our bodies, you can imagine what our positive and negative emotions are doing to the internal situation in our bodies. Now, they made experiments on petri dishes with various growths, bacteria, cell growths there, and see if their mind could affect whether they grow more or less. And they found that the mind was able, by focusing on them and not focusing on a control group of petri dishes, that they could actually have an effect, and the possibility that the results were by chance is less than 1 to 1,000. So we're talking about experimentally verifiable, repeatable experiences in which a human mind was able to affect the growth of these microorganisms. And in a similar experiment on cells and test tubes, they put the same number of cells from the same culture, and they put the same amount of poison in both test tubes, and then they prayed for one and didn't pray for the other in a controlled situation. And the cells in the test tube that was prayed for had a 20% greater survival rate. And then when they imagined light on one and didn't imagine light on the other, same experiment, they had 20% greater survival rate. And when they did both visualization of light and prayer, they had a 40% greater survival rate. So we're talking about machines, cells, bacteria, and this cannot be a placebo effect. This cannot be suggestion. These are not personalities that can react to suggestion. We're seeing that the mind and the way the mind focuses and what the mind's intention is for these three things affects, and it's definitely the result of the mind's action. The same is done on plants. Same experiments were done on plants, and we see on the left side the plant that was not receiving positive thoughts, and on the right the plant that was. Now, in some experiments have shown that if we place our DNA, a small piece of our DNA, in a tube with photons, that our DNA will affect the photons and cause them to take a structured situation. That is, they will become an ordered kind of reality. And if we remove our DNA, they can maintain that. So our DNA is affecting the photons, which is the basis of our physical reality. They also found that if they took some DNA from a person, and they took it even 500 kilometers from where he is, and they subjected him to a stress or to an emotion, that those DNA molecules 500 miles away would be affected. So we can see that there is this non-locality. Now, the effect of the mind on the body. Now, this is Bruce Lipton, who has written the book, The Biology of Beliefs. He says he's a professor of biology, and specifically epigenetics, which is the study of the possible changes in our genetic structure. He says, in the last decade, epigenetics research has shown that our DNA that we inherit is not totally determined by our birth. Our genes are not our faith. Environmental factors such as food, anxiety, and emotions can alter the data in our genes without changing their basic structure. Some of those changes can be passed on to our offspring. We are managers of our biology. We have the ability to alter the functioning of our biology and our fate. So it seems that our mind is able to affect the functioning of our DNA. So we're not totally controlled by our DNA. Now, another thing we're going to have to take into consideration in deciding whether the brain creates consciousness or whether consciousness creates the brain is the placebo effect, which has an amazing effect when people believe that they're taking something that's helping them, even though what they're taking has no therapeutic value. And that can be up to equals to 21 to 40% of the situations. And they can give people pills which have no healing ability, injections, surgery. In one study, they told people they were going to do surgery on their knees, and they sedated them, and they had another control group. And in one control group, they did do the surgery on the knees. And the other control group, they did not do the surgery. They just made a small incision, and they closed it up. They did no surgery on the knee. And there was an improvement because the people believed that they had had surgery, and their beliefs healed them. Now, sometimes these healings do not last forever, but we see that the mind very much, from what it believes, affects the body. Now, this is an amazing case of Dr. Bruner Klopfer and his patient, Mr. Wright, with advanced cancer. Mr. Wright had about 2 weeks to live. And Dr. Klopfer said he had nothing to lose, and he gave him an untested drug, cryobiosin. And his cancer disappeared in a few days. I mean, his illness just melted away. And in 10 days, he was fine. He was flying his plane. And after 2 months, Mr. Wright reads in the American Medical Association journal that this substance, this chemical, was not showing good results. He became ill again just by reading that. This is called the nocebo effect rather than placebo. And then Dr. Bruner thought, okay, what can I do now? And he gave him an injection of distilled water with no therapeutic value. And he told him this is an upgraded version of the medicine. And he got well again. And he was well again for 2 months until he read the final estimation of the American Medical Association that this drug it had no healing powers. And he died 2 days later. All of this is the mind. So how can we say that the brain is creating the mind when the mind is obviously what is creating whatever is happening here? Now then we have the studies on patients with multiple personality disorder, where all personalities come and go in these people. And there can be patients where one personality is allergic to orange juice or something else, and then another personality, when it comes in, is not. In fact, an experience by Dr. Francine Howland, a Yale psychiatrist, a man coming to her was stung by a wasp, and he really swelled up because he had this allergy. And she sent him to another doctor to help him with the reaction towards this thing. And on the way, another personality came in, and it all disappeared because the other personality had no allergy towards the wasp sting. And then by the time he got back to the Miss Francine Howland, the other personality came back into functioning, and he was bloated again by the wasp sting. So what we're saying here is that depending on which personality is functioning in this same brain, in this same body, the reactions are totally different. And how this person reacts to alcohol or drugs or anything else is very different depending on the personality. In fact, scars can appear and disappear, even burn marks and cysts can appear and disappear depending on which personality is governing the brain. One personality can be right-handed, another left-handed. They can have different ability to see and need different pairs of glasses. Even the eye color can change. In fact, there was one case in which one personality had diabetes, and when the other personality came in, there was no diabetes. And then when it went back to the original personality, there was diabetes. So obviously here, the personality, the mind structure, the thought systems of these personalities is causing the body to do entirely different things, having the same brain. So how are we saying that consciousness comes from the brain? Hypnosis can speed up healing in herpes and skin burns. And also hypnotic suggestion can cause herpes and skin burns. They can put a piece of metal on someone's thigh or arm and tell them that it's very hot, and their consciousness will create a burn on the skin, just as if it was hot when it wasn't. Now, at the Heart Math Institute in California, they had discovered, it was a group of cardiologists who are studying the heart and the effect of the emotions on the heart and the effect of the heart on the brain and on clarity and problem solving. And you can see above how the heart functions when we are frustrated or angry, and below how the heart functions when we feel gratitude or love. And they discovered that 5 minutes of love increase our immune defenses for about 5 hours and greater clarity, mental clarity. And 5 minutes of anger can diminish our immune defense and clarity for 5 hours. Love creates a more harmonious balance in the cooperation between our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, which is very basic for our health. And they found that by employing a method that they created called freeze frame, which we call in Greek the listening to the heart, this method creates a stronger immune system, 100% greater DHEA, that is slowing the anti-aging, we're aging slower, 23% less stress, and much greater peace. The effect of love on the health of the heart. In a study of 10,000 men, those who felt that their wives loved them had 50% less problems with their hearts. 50%. Dr. Dean Ornish is a cardiologist, and his study, he found a study at Yale University of 119 men and 40 women. Those who felt more loved had less problems with blood flow to the heart. And a study of 276 persons showed that those who felt more personal connections with people had better health. And on 700 elderly, those who had someone to care for, not to care for them, but to care for and express their love to, had better health. Now, there's been a systematic study of research on prayer has showed that those prayed for recovered more quickly with less pain, less complications than those not prayed for. And this is statistically significant. So this is 2,200 reports showing that those prayed for recover more quickly. And that people who pray are less likely to get sick, better able to cope mentally and emotionally with their illnesses, and more likely to recover from surgery, and more likely to recover from illness. Now, this is a book called Remarkable Recovery. People who recover without actually there being a medical reason for them to recover. And when asked what they thought helped them recover, you see the following results. Prayer, 68% of them, religious faith, guided imagery, music, singing, positive belief, meditation, exercise, walking, stress reduction, and acceptance of the illness itself. So the highest percentage here is acceptance and positive belief. So we can understand here that our belief system is the main factor in creating our health. Dr. David Larson says, a belief in a higher power helps us to deal with stress. We perceive every problem as an opportunity to become stronger. So it seems to me that we can clearly see that our beliefs affect our perception, our body, and our mind. So it's as if we're wearing colored glasses. If our glasses are pink, everything around us is going to be a shade of pink. It could be dark pink or light pink, but everyone that we see and everything that is around us is going to be colored by the color of our glasses. And if we understand that we are all wearing glasses created by our belief systems, then we're going to be seeing people who are rejecting us or wanting to control us or who are faulted or not good. All of this because this is our belief system. So what we need to do is to change the belief system which is coloring our glasses and not allowing us to experience the harmonious and happy and healthy, loving, and perhaps even abundant life that we'd like to have. Now, there's this interesting story that was going around on the internet, and there was this woman who was noticed that a new neighbor had moved into the house next by, and she noticed that every time the woman across the way would be hanging her clothing, that they weren't clean. And she would comment about this every day to her husband every time she saw this woman hanging out these dirty clothes. Until one day, she saw that the clothes were clean. And she mentioned it to her husband. He says, "No, you see what happened is I cleaned our windows." So it wasn't the woman's clothing that was dirty. It was the woman's window through which she was watching the other woman's clothing. So we need to clean the windows of our perception if we want to see reality as it is. So what is my perception? And you feel free to come to your own conclusions. Considering all of the above that we have mentioned, I perceive us as consciousness, and that we are expressing ourselves through a mind which is affecting our brain and is affected by our brain, which is affecting our physical reality and being affected by our physical reality. But for me, our consciousness exists before the creation of the brain, parallel to the brain, and continues existing after the death of the brain. Now, a few more facts. Each of our emotions causes certain kinds of hormones which are called peptides. So there are peptides for anger, for hurt, for fear, for anxiety, for pain. And these peptides are chemical substances which flow through our bloodstream and are accepted by receptacles on the cells of our body. And these are very similar to substances like heroin and nicotine and caffeine. And what happens is that they're addictive, so that we become chemically addicted to emotions. And this is the subject of the book Molecules of Emotion by Dr. Candace Pert, that we become actually chemically addicted to feeling hurt or injustice or anger or fear, and we are looking for our dose. And we do this by engaging other people in the creation of these emotions, but also doing it by ourselves. So we get in this vicious circle of emotions that are creating the situation in ourselves, and ourselves that are asking for those emotions. Something similar happens with the synapses in our brain, which are connections between the neurons of our brain, which create what we call neural nets. That is the number of nerve cells combining together. This is like the biological correlation of beliefs. And so every time we perceive something in the same way, this neural net is strengthened. And so we're more likely next time to perceive it in the same way. So we're locked into this method of perception. What we want to do is to break this up by being able to perceive some things which are causing us pain or suffering or discord in our life, to perceive them in a different way. And what happens is these old synapses begin to wither and we create new ones. So as we create a new belief system, we're creating new connections in our brain. So it's not that we're being controlled by our brain, we are actually causing new synapses to be created. Another fact that we have to take into consideration, studies by the Transcendental Meditation Organization, at least 48 studies, show that when a number of meditators gather in one city and meditate for many hours a day, without doing any kind of positive projection, just transcending the mind and experiencing silence as much as they can, that there is a 23% decrease in negative factors such as crime. That is, this is done in cooperation with the police. And the possibility that these results could be by chance is 1 to 1 million. It's not chance. And it's something that's been done in 48 cities, including Washington, D.C., and Bombay, and Geneva. So what are some of these basic beliefs that we're going to have to choose between? One basic belief is that we are only these bodies and our consciousness ends with the death of the physical body. Okay, whatever each person wants to believe, it's a possibility. Neither of these have been proven exclusively. It has not been proved that we exist before and after the body. It's not been proved that we don't exist. So these are hypotheses. And I choose the hypothesis which for me explains the most facts, the most phenomena which are around me. If I have a hypothesis that doesn't explain most of the things that I see around me, then I have to think about that hypothesis and consider another one. Another possible belief is that we are spiritual beings who are only temporarily expressing ourselves through these physical bodies. Another stance, we are victims of the powers around us. Another way of seeing it is that we are the creators of our realities and not the victims. We are controlled by our brains and DNA and not able to change. This is the perception expressed by the first scientists that we mentioned in this presentation. The opposite of that is that we are affected by our DNA and our brains, but we can change ourselves and our lives and the world. Those first scientists who spoke, or we mentioned, believe there is no free will. You'll have to decide, do we have free will if we use it? We are evil sinners and not worthy of love. This perception doesn't come from science, but mostly from religion. Another perception is that we are innocent expressions of the divine and deserve love as we are. We are weak and live in a dangerous world. Another possibility is we are strong and spiritually safe. We are these separate bodies, and we are one, spirit, energy, and matter. Closing, I'd like to refer to a few more scientists. Erwin Schrödinger, Nobel physicist, says, I venture to call it, he's calling the mind, indestructible, since it has a peculiar timetable, namely, the mind is always now. There is no before and after for the mind. And Albert Einstein. A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, which is a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal decisions and to affection for a few persons nearest. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Albert Einstein. The Greek astrophysicist Manos Danesi says the following: the idea of separateness of material objects, that you and I and separate things, or that I and the table or I and the tree are separate things, is a false perception created by our senses, the inability of our senses to perceive the truth. This separate existence is not a reality. The weakness of our senses segments and separates the underlying unity so that we have the illusion of these separate objects. Think about it. If everything is one, and every form is nothing more than a temporary density in a moving energy continuum, then we cannot talk about us and others because all is one. The perception of separation is the product of our genetic coding as humans. We chose, I'm speaking here historically and biologically, do not take this personally, the loneliness of our individuality. Nature birthed us as one. Separation, individuality, along with whatever good or bad comes with them, are creations of our DNA in a specific way and not in another. So in this way, we are being affected by our brains and the way we perceive. If we had a different type of DNA and other senses, we would see things completely differently than we do today. Thus, that which we call individuality, the closing into ourselves, is a result of our inability to perceive the unity of the illusion, universe. So you're going to have to make your own choices here, your own conclusions. Based on what we have said, that there are verified observations of the environment when the brain is not functioning, based on the fact that there is a placebo and nocebo effect, that the physical conditions can change in multiple personality disorders, remote viewing, verified ability of our intentions and prayers on machines, cells, plants, and humans, hypnotic effect on creating and healing herpes and burns, the ability to change the functioning of the DNA, and verified memories of young children of experiences before their birth, causes me personally to come to the conclusion that our consciousness exists before our birth. When functioning through the physical brain and body, our consciousness is very much affected by them. We can, however, with intention and effort, affect our brains, bodies, and lives. We can also affect others, and as consciousness we continue to exist after the death of the body. This explanation seems to explain the highest percentage of the facts. If I hear of a better explanation tomorrow, I will seriously consider it. And I'd like to close with this very beautiful picture of this child and apparently this dog praying. So I wish for you to think deeply about these, what you've heard, and to make your own conclusions about what you are and what you can do. May you be well.